Okay, guys. Hang on, let me close the window. Dang, that was crazy. So it would not access my camera. A little bit hard to do a video if you can't get the camera running. It was trying to play from my phone camera, which took me about 5 minutes to figure out. So sorry about that. Anyway, we're here. How's it going? So, um, I've been going through finances with my Bible study. We've been talking about the Israelites and how they are taken from slaves to owners of their own kingdom when God brings them from out of the Exodus through the Promised Land. And He really sets them up to be quite blessed and quite impressive, right? He gives them all of the tools to make a land of their own that is really just incredible. And the way that all goes down is really not that complicated. God is pretty clear about how He wants things to go and about what He wants them to do. And so He makes it pretty obvious, pretty something that is something we can follow ourselves now. So, how do we get to a place where we've got financial stability? What God promises them is as long as they're being obedient, they will continue to be able to enjoy this for forever, right? Sorry, I'm getting a lot of notifications. Let me make sure I've done all this right. I think we're good. Anyways, so let's get started, and we'll get started about talking about finances, how the Israelites do it, and how we can kind of emulate that in our own lives. So, to start with, we're actually going to start with my life, though, because I've got a pretty interesting, I think, financial story. So, as far as I can remember, the letters came the same week. Now, half of them were letters that I was expecting, and half of them were a surprise. Now, that week, I was trying to put my room together. I had just moved from the smallest room in the house to the biggest room. And so everything was freshly painted. There's boxes everywhere. Everything's just a mess of crazy. And I really haven't finished getting my life together. Um, but I had at least pulled off some work while I could. But first, the letters. So I hadn't expected one so soon. So 8 years of college and medical school loans. And so I knew I was going to be getting letters about my loans at some point. I just didn't expect it was going to come quite that quick before I'd even started working, right? So they're all at different facilities, they're in different amounts. So I wasn't even sure what the total was, and they came from different places. So I put those letters aside and kind of went to the other bill that I wasn't actually expecting. Um, a hospital bill. So it was the first of many, unfortunately, but it was the most unforgettable. And those bills totaled about $80,000. So I have just finished medical school. I have just finished 8 years of schooling and have all of my loans for that. And now I get an additional $80,000 medical bill on top of that. So things are not looking good right now. I'm a planner. I have always been on top of it, right? Salutatory and top of my class, dazzling everyone on every front, right? I was used to winning awards and scholarships and making plans for things I hadn't even yet encountered, right? Like I knew what I was going to do with the loans. I already had a plan for them. But I wasn't used to having some kind of huge financial setback that I hadn't expected. The medical bills really threw me off. And it wasn't even a small bill. It wasn't like something I could just go get a side job for and pay for. $80,000 was a big deal. So, um, I think this was just a great opportunity to remember that life sometimes just is not smooth, right? Like things really do get complicated. And everyone will have setbacks in their career. Now, hopefully, yours won't be like mine. Hopefully, you will never have to do anything like that. But some setbacks we don't really think much about. We just kind of jump right over and keep going. And other setbacks just kind of make us freeze. They paralyze us in a way or affect us in a way that it's really kind of hard to recover from. And what do you do when you hit one of those setbacks, right? So for me, starting residency was so complicated because I got sick right before residency. I had bacterial meningitis just a few days after graduating from medical school. So I was pulled off work, and it took several months for me to get cognitive clearing to be able to go back to work. So I literally got all these letters and all these bills when I didn't even have a job. I had no future paycheck coming. I had no idea if I was going to be allowed to go back to work. And essentially, I was just sitting there going, should I just give up? So we're going to go through a series of steps that I kind of went through. To be fair, it took me several years to go through these steps, but we're going to act like you can do them all today. Why not, right? We'll give you an overview of kind of just what I thought about. So, rebuilding or just building up finances that last takes multiple steps. And so, what we want to do is we want to look at our past, we want to look to the future, we want to make good present plans, and then we want to remember our inheritance in God. Those are things I think are the four most crucial steps to think through. So, let's start with the past. The past doesn't really sound like the right place to start, especially when you're thinking through finances, right? You know how bad things were. That's why you're trying to get to a new place, right? We understand, though, that the past is the only way to get a secure foundation set so that we can build other things on it. We know that in theory, but again, we usually want to run away from our past. And in the real world, we're surrounded by a lot. It's not usually biblical ways of thinking. The things that our families have passed down to us are not always great ways to build. Sometimes they're things that kind of get in our way, right? So, in order to overcome your weaknesses in life, and especially in the financial world, you're going to need to identify them. And then you're going to need to set some clear boundaries so that you can move forward. A good way to think about this is like imagine you're bowling, right? If you're learning how to bowl, it's really helpful to put the bumpers up so that at least the ball is going in the right direction, right? So we want to think about how can we create some boundaries? How can we create bumpers that keep us going into the right direction for a financial win? Okay. Now, we've all heard stories of people who showed great promise and started out doing these incredible things, sometimes became like millionaires or multimillionaires and were doing so great. And then something crazy just took them out, some crazy scandal, some ridiculous relationship, something that probably you wouldn't have even thought of them for. But somehow they're stuck in this sin that completely destroys their entire life, right? And we don't want to become people who rise to these great heights and then fall just as rapidly. We want to be people who are thinking about where we're coming from. And again, setting up guardrails so that we don't let stupid things take us out from the life that we're building. So let's consider some different stories. These are a couple of stories I went through with my Bible study. Think about who you resemble the most. These are just some past stories. See if you resemble any of them in any way. So the first question is, are you a saver or a spender? So my uncle took a job as a paper boy when he was like 11 or 12. So he worked diligently for months and was doing great. But a couple of months in, the newspaper contacted my grandparents and said, "Is everything okay? He hasn't cashed any of his checks," right? And so my uncle takes his parents to his room, opens up a drawer, and shows them all of the uncashed checks, right? He had not deposited nor spent a dime, even though he'd been working for months, right? Are you a natural saver or spender? Are you naturally good at giving? R.G. Letourneau is a really interesting story. He created this machinery basically that was used for World War II, kind of just moving things around. And he's called by many God's businessmen because of his philanthropy. He actually lived on 10% of his income and actually spent or gave away 90%, kind of backwards from what we would usually say. Now, his businesses did really well, so he was not exactly broke. But he started doing this during the Great Depression and then was known for it, continued to do this over the next several decades for his entire life. He was able to give like that. Do you feel like you've never got enough? I heard a story of a doctor recently who was a clinician who was doing very well. His friend said he was making about $400,000 a year, right? It's a decent salary. But I guess he was unsettled or bored or something. So he decides to switch to pain medicine and to open up a clinic for giving out medicines for pain, which is fine. Except evidently he started doing all these deals and things on the side that were kind of illegal, where he just became people's drug dealers and was giving them random scripts for money, right? So after he went to jail, all his wife could say was, "We were just trying to put more aside for retirement," right? Do you feel like you don't have enough? What do you tend to splurge on? What do you tend to waste money on? Tony was $23,000 in debt by the time he turned 24 years old. The problem wasn't loans or houses or cars or credit cards. His problem was gambling. Now, his addiction made him fail at a budget and sticking to it again and again and again. So he had to get help with his gambling before he could actually stop the random spending and actually build a financial plan that worked, right? It took time, but good habits were established and finally he started to live differently. So now these are all extreme examples, okay? But I like these stories because sometimes you can kind of see yourself in them. What do you notice about their personalities, their habits? What does it make you think of in your own life? Is there something that you notice that can contribute to you not building a lasting financial future? You need to know your weaknesses. You need to know your tendencies. You need to know things that could be strengths or problems for you so that you can build around them and build a good life. Okay. Now, we start with this because this is where God starts. When we're going through the book of Deuteronomy, this is what ends up talking to them about right before they enter the promised land. Now, remember, the Israelites are in Egypt, they're in slavery for hundreds of years, and then God takes them out of slavery. He does all of these miracles, takes them through the desert, does all these other miracles, changing the way they think about life. And now they're about to go into the promised land and take over Israel. But before they go, God is making them think about these things and gives them these last minute reminders. And the first thing he says is, don't forget the past. So when we look at Deuteronomy 8, verses 2 through 6, it says, "Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord disciplines you." Now, again, the Israelites were living for hundreds of years. And it's easy to say, oh, okay, now we get to move on to real life. We get to move on to the things we're actually wanting to do. Let's just forget the past. But God specifically tells them to not do that, to make sure that they remember where they came from. We want to say, oh, thank God, the desert is over. But God is like, you need to remember who you were and what I did in the midst of your affliction. Right now, what our affliction is can look very different in different seasons, and it can look very different in different people's lives. Right now, for the Israelites themselves, manna probably didn't seem as miraculous as the Red Sea. It was something that was consistent, that was showing up on the ground, that they had to go do some things for to get themselves. It didn't look as amazing as water, opening up so they could walk on dry land. But it was still a miracle and it was still an evidence of God showing up through the things that they needed. So for us, a bill being paid doesn't necessarily look as miraculous as winning the lottery, right? Or I didn't get in a car accident today doesn't look as amazing as I got freed from cancer, right? Now, there's different levels of ways that God provides for us, but the provision is still there and God is still there as well. And we need to remember how He's blessed us in the past so that we can see that He's capable of taking us forward in the future. Because it's so easy for our financial wins to look at to look like a list of things that we can fulfill by ourselves. But God wants so badly to stop our way of thinking and help us to get to a place where we can be wealthy and good and set forever. So, what lies are you believing about your finances? What things exist in your past that you need to think about so that you can move forward? Is it that no one else in your family ever does well? Is it that God hates money? Money is evil. I'm just going to mess it up again. It doesn't work even when I try hard. I'm not smart enough to do this. Is it that I deserve better than this? All of these ways of thinking affect the way we make decisions now. And again, we need to be aware of them so that we can make sure that we're not letting them trip us up as we move forward. So, when I got sick in residency, I was required to start counseling to work as a doctor. So, when I started going through the past, what mattered to me in medicine, what was rough, what was easy, I started going through what my tendencies were, what I hated. And mostly, this all led to the counselor asking me the question, what do you want? Do you want to be in medicine? Do you want to fight through these medical and financial problems for a future in medicine? Or do you want to walk away? Right. And so the next step after we've looked at our past becomes, where are you going? What does your future look like? Where are you trying to get your money to take you? What is the end goal? Is this something that you already clearly know? Sometimes we start out in our finances and we're not really sure exactly what we're building or where we're wanting to go. But we can definitely start with putting money aside and kind of figuring out exactly what we want our life to look like later. But it is good to know where our future is trying to go, because the gap between where we are and where we want to be is what helps fuel the effort to get there. Right. So, here's some steps I heard in a podcast to help you think through your financial goals, to help you make sure that you create a clear future goal for you. So, one, what is causing you pain? What exists in your life right now that you would love to put some focus and energy on and make it change, right? Two, what are your weaknesses? We've already talked about how the past factors in and can kind of help you make decisions about the future. Three, what is the most important next step in your journey? Once you're starting to get the idea of the big picture goal, break it down into pieces. What do you need to do first? Who can help you along the way? Four, make categories to kind of help simplify things, make sure you've got everything taken care of. The podcast I listened to said his categories were real estate, brokerage, marketing, investment, business, and personal, right? Like obviously he's building a business, but there's a lot of different parts of that that you want to make sure you think of. And then fifth is your goal realistic? Are you challenging yourself and making things ridiculous so that they'll become overwhelming? Or are you getting something that's realistic? What's the difference also between asking God for help and expecting God to not show up at all? In general, keep in mind that your God given visions for the future should not be doable within your scope. God is not looking at your checking account and then making a plan for your life. Okay. He is not looking at what you have now to make a plan for your future. He's looking at your heart and then he's making his plans. Now, sometimes you need to get yourself in some pride erasing, God requiring circumstances where God has to show up for you to move forward. But in general, He should be doing some of the pull. So, your dreams, your future, where you want to be, is going to be a little bit outside of your scope of ability because God is going to step in and help. It shouldn't be a burden that you try to bear alone. So, for my example, after I got sick, I'd gotten out of the hospital, I'm not working, trying to figure out what to do next. So, what number one, what is causing you pain? So I was exhausted and broke, right? So I've got all these loans, I've got all these medical bills, and I've got a paycheck of $0. Okay. So the numbers are not adding up. What's causing me pain is the fact that I need a paycheck that actually is going to cover all my bills. Okay. So, two, what are your weaknesses? For me, middle class America, but in general, I was not used to being in dire financial circumstances, right? I didn't know how to fix something this big. So I felt frozen in fear. And knowing that about my past kind of helped me to know that I needed to think about this differently in order to move forward. I couldn't use past financial examples to get me there. Three, what is the most important next step in your journey? So for me, the next step was supposed to be becoming a doctor, right? And that would fix the financial problems if I could just get there. But I still had 3 more years of training, right? I still had to get through actual residency. I still had to be cleared to go back to residency. So that could fix my problems, but it wasn't going to fix them right now. So, what was going to be the next step that was actually going to be helpful? So then, four, making categories to help simplify and not forget things. This was really helpful for me at the time. My categories were health, career, spiritual, and personal. That was it. Everything else in life went away. Okay. These were the things that I made the most important in my life. And these were the things that I spent money on, and otherwise, I had to throw everything out. I had to slim down my budget significantly and concentrate on the things that mattered the most. Okay. So, like, I had previously not spent a lot of time on self care. I was 25 and healthy, and who cared, right? But in order to recover after several weeks in the hospital, after being sick, I needed vitamins, I needed rest, I needed doctor's appointments, right? I needed supplements, and I needed them to all factor into my budget to help me get to the next step, right? So, fifth, is your goal realistic? So I wanted to pay off my medical bills. It's an $80,000 bill. Here, pay it off. That's really what I wanted. But that's not a realistic goal, right? It's not like I have that kind of money sitting around anywhere. Writing a check for 80,000 is just not going to happen. So I needed to make a plan that was more realistic. And the bigger picture we addressed was the end goal. My previous end goal was becoming a doctor, but that was too far away to be helpful now. And I needed to make a new end goal of like financial security, right? Like I needed to not be living with $0 and no job first before I could become a doctor, right? So I needed a new future goal. Um, and I needed a new endpoint with a new timeline. So I almost did walk away at that time, but the reason I did not was clear because God had a bigger picture, God had a bigger plan than mine. And that's just like what we see with the Israelites. When we go back to Deuteronomy 8, verses 6 through 10, it reminds them of their future goals. God talks about a good land with brooks and streams and springs and valleys and hills, pomegranates, olive oil, honey, a land where you will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. So he was not just moving them from one location to another. God actually had this plan to really rehaul their entire lives. Remember, they were living in slavery, but he's taking them not just to a new location, but to a place where they're actually going to get to enjoy and live in abundance, to be able to live their entire lives, including finances, on a different level, on a better level. It's a holistic plan that's going to take over every aspect of their lives. And that's God's best for them. And God has the same plan for us. He cares about what our lives look like. But in order to actually get to our end goal, we're going to have to stop dreaming and we're going to actually have to do some work in order to get there. So, what are the practical steps? So first we go through the past, we look at what our tendencies are, what our weaknesses are. And then second, we think about the future. Where is it that we're trying to go? Where are we trying to get to? And then third, we make some practical present goals. And that's what we see in Deuteronomy 8. Verses 11 through 16 is how to get there. God lays out some really specific rules, some really specific boundaries that they're going to want to put in place in order to be able to get to where God is telling them to go. Okay. So be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you to this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, then your heart will become proud and you will forget the Lord your God. So, how do we do this well with our finances? How do we continue to keep God in his place so that our finances stay steady as well? And so that God's blessings stay in our lives? We have to do it by making some specific plans. Okay. So, main financial goals. I love the way that Ron Blue lays it out in a Bible study I went through with God Owns It All. So he says there's five main goals for our lives. We save for the unexpected. We avoid debt, pay it off quickly, set long term goals, spend less than we earn, and give generously. When we look through the Bible, these are the rules for finances and for living well that we see again and again in multiple ways. Now, you can't do any of these things if your expenses exceed your income of $0. So, like I said, after I got sick, I had no income, I wasn't working. So, what were the super practical things that I could do that would help with the fact that I wasn't working and had $0 coming in? What could I do about these medical bills and loans that were sitting here waiting to be paid? So, first, can you increase your income? So, for me, this started with asking for help. I literally asked everyone I could think of and everyone that was recommending to that I could for help. So, I tried to apply for FMLA. Nope, couldn't get help there. I hadn't worked long enough. I went to government assistance. They couldn't help me. My salary was too high, even though I wasn't being paid it. I went to the hospital. I said, "Do you have any charity policies? Can you help me?" And they said that basically they could break my bills into payments, so I could pay them off in monthly installments. That's great. But again, I still have $0 coming in. But cool, we'll take it. Okay. My employer said no, they couldn't help me. But again, the general idea was drop your pride and ask for help wherever you can think of. How do you know people? How can you get some additional income coming in? They may say no, but they may have an idea that helps, right? So the next thing, if you can't increase your income, can you get a new job, right? I could not. I had just gotten out of the hospital. I had a brain injury. I could barely like I was having trouble with my memory to begin with. Learning a new job was not going to go well, and also no one's going to hire me for I got pulled off my last job for a brain injury, right? So that was not an option, but sometimes it is. Can you get a new job? Three, you want to make sure you just get focused, right? You want to just rewrite the budget that you have and reuse the money that you've got, right? So I wrote an emergency budget, right? I wrote 6 months. What are the five most important things in my life? And everything else in my life gets no money, right? So again, I was concentrating on health, career, spiritual, and personal. Okay. So my life became go to work, sleep well, go to medical appointments, spend time on nutrition and spend time with God. And that was basically it. Nobody else got time, money, or energy, no clothing, no extra food, like everything, no vacations. Everything was dire circumstances. This is what I have money for. So cut costs however you can. And then the only other thing I could think of was to sell things. I just graduated from medical school. What do I really have? I have a bunch of books and clothes that don't fit anymore. Therefore, I'm selling books and clothes that don't fit anymore, right? Like, what can you do? What can you really do when you concentrate on and get focused on what's most important? And again, this is why setting your future goal is so important because it keeps you focused and keeps you making good decisions in the moment so that you can get to the better future goal. So stay focused, okay? Some things sound good on the surface, but are not worthwhile. Like this was not the time to book a healing retreat in Hawaii, right? I didn't have money for that. I didn't have time for that. So stay focused on what your long term goals are and where God is trying to take you. And then do your part, but also ask God to do His, right? This is where we really need to step up and increase our prayer life and really just ask God for help. We want to act in this world like we've got authority and like we've got the ability to make decisions, but also God is our father and he cares about the things that matter to us. Getting out of debt, getting out of financial struggle, getting out of slavery, getting out of these bad places in our lives, that's God's goal for us. He wants us to be able to live live life and live it more abundantly, right? So God is on our side, and it's so important to remember that regardless of the setbacks, He can still take care of you and He can still show up in incredible ways. Sometimes He just wants you to ask, what is God's best for you? And how can you start praying and believing Him for that? So, the last part of the Israelite recommendations in Deuteronomy 8 talks about inheritance. It talks about their inheritance in the land. It says, "You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is He who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms His covenant, which He swore to your ancestors as it is today." So we do our part, but we also have to remember that God has a part that He wants to play as well. God is not trying to leave you hanging in life. He wants to have a part to play in your life. He wants to be able to see you enjoy it and see you walk out your best. You are God's, right? The hardest thing to remember in a transition is that God is still on your side. He is not looking at your bank account and getting afraid. Psalms 50 tells us God owns the entire world. It says, "Every creature in the forest is mine, the wild animals on all the mountains. I know every mountain bird by name." If I get hungry, do you think I'd tell you? All creation and all bounty are mine. Spread a banquet of praise, serve God, and call for help when you're in trouble. I'll help you, and you'll honor me. So, if I had had the right perspective at the time when I very first got sick, if I'd had the right perspective in my relationship with God, this probably wouldn't have been as difficult as it was, right? I wouldn't have questioned everything. If you imagine that your father owns the hospital and you get a big hospital bill, are you concerned about it? No. Why? Because your dad owns the hospital. He's going to take care of it some way, shape, or form, right? But that's not how I was thinking about this circumstance. And that's far too often not how we think about our finances, right? Like, now, God does not want us to be all like whiny rich kids who, assume the world revolves around him and just, demand things from him. But God does want us to act like his children and to know that he promises an inheritance. He promises to take care of us, and he promises more than suffering and unending stress in our lives. So God knows exactly where he wants you to be. He knows exactly where you're going in life, and he has the ability to get that money and get those promises and get everything together, get your inheritance together and hand it to you if you'll trust him to get involved. Now, I mean, honestly, I was praying for a while and really didn't think anything was happening, many months to be fair. And I really thought, I don't know, let's just keep going. So the first thing that happened is the hospital called back. So they said they'd talked it over. And since I wasn't working and wasn't cleared to return, what they could do for me was give me my vacation money. So they were going to take away my vacation time for the rest of the year and pay me some money for that. And so that wasn't everything, but at least it was some money. And that was better than nothing. And more than anything, it was this tiny little thing that reminded me that God actually was hearing my prayers, right? Like, that wasn't an answer to literally everything. I still couldn't work. I still wasn't healed, but maybe God actually was on my side. And maybe he was actually listening to the prayers that, at least the ones my pastors were praying, right? Because I was honestly about to give up. I stood on someone else's faith for most of that year. My friends, my family, my pastors, they got me through the hardest of times. And they believed in God even when I didn't. And they kept praying and kept getting things to change in incredible ways. And then God showed up and truly blew my mind. So I got another letter in the mail from the hospital, another bill. I assumed it was going to be, it seemed like they never stopped, to be fair. But this one was different. So instead of adding more numbers to the growing medical debt, it subtracted it. So it turns out I had paid lab fees during my last year of medical school, and that included catastrophic medical illness insurance. So essentially, if you get super, super sick, they'll cover a large portion of your bills. So I didn't really think that mattered because I, again, had graduated from medical school. Like this, I got sick after medical school was over. But somehow that insurance included this grace period that I can only attribute to God. So somehow $80,000 worth of medical bills became 10,000. It's not nothing, but that's huge. And it was a clear and perfect reminder that even when I don't make the best decisions for myself, and even when I get in these horrible circumstances, God is still watching over and taking care of and answering prayers for me. He treats me like a child with an inheritance, with something greater to live for and something greater to do. I had spent years building a relationship with God, laying good financial foundations, following God's principles. And when I needed help the most, God showed up and showed out for me. He gave me an inheritance to help my finances that I couldn't have even imagined or prayed for at the time. But he made it possible for me to finish the journey of medicine that he and I had started. And eventually I was cleared to return to work. Eventually I finished my medical training and eventually paid off all of those bills. And now I'm actually building for a good financial future instead of just drowning, right? So today I am offering you the chance to just rewrite your finances and to rewrite them in a way that's based on God's strength, not on your own. Now, obviously, there are parts that you're going to play. There are things that you need to do. There's things that you need to obey and set up. But I think part of what we need to do is really just trust that God has got us in the midst of uncertain times, in the midst of we're not sure what's going to happen with Social Security, like all of these things that kind of stress us out. It's important to remember that God has got us. So I'm offering you someone to stand with. I love the passage in the Bible that says Moses had to keep his rod raised in order for them to win the battle that they were fighting. And obviously, his arms get tired. And so his friends come and hold up the staff with him. So if you're battling massive debt, financial setbacks, just feeling frustrated and feeling like you don't really have much to hope in, you're going to need that kind of support. You're going to need someone to help you hold your arms up. So come stand on my faith is what I'm offering you to do. So come and stand on the faith that somehow got me through brain damage and through financial catastrophe and now into walking as a faith-filled Christian doctor. So let me remind you of just the wonder of God the God we serve, and give you some really practical steps to get to a better place, right? So the world may be rocking, but let's build a financial plan that will never break. So, again, what God lays out for the Israelites includes their financial prosperity out of slavery and into something much greater where they get to live and work and be and live as He has called them to do, right? And so the way that He does this is He goes through their past, He gives them a future goal. He gives them present circumstances to follow, and then also keeps reminding them of their inheritance and His standing, his love for them as a people, right? So Deuteronomy lays this all out really good. And I've got, again, this is just a brief intro that I've been giving today, but I do have a full study that you can kind of walk through with more detail of how exactly to build a good financial plan for yourself, right? So, week one is going to talk about how to get reset and energized and get through the past. Week two, how to refocus like kings and queens on the future. And a three, to revisit your confidence and the steps and obedience that you need to do now. And then four, to reignite your call. So this is all available through the app that I've kind of worked on. And if you would like to sign up for it, if you watch this video today, I'll just kind of sign you up for free. So just email me. Let's see. You can just email or just go to my website actually, and I'll put that in the chat. Go to the website on Podia, and if you email me, then I will send you the link for how to get into this and at least get the next few steps of your financial journey set, and get you to a much better place. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you have a great rest of your Saturday. And I will share this link with everyone. Sorry it started out so crazy, but at least we got it in there somehow. All right, guys. You have a great one, and I will talk to you later.